Once within the walls of the seemingly abandoned Mursaat prison, the stench of dried corpses lofts heavily within the stale air. Death row is lined from cell to cell with the mutilated bodies of those at once imprisoned, and, as if to insinuate their tragic ends were merely the result of some archaic game, your progression through the prison is barred behind a complex match of chess. Your opponent is the enemy's king piece, the Mursaat Overseer. Before we can discuss the Mursaat Overseer and his direct mechanics, it is important to first briefly mention how exactly to enter his boss arena. After moving Glenna up through the entrance of the prison and into Death Row, you'll notice a broken shovel directly next to some rubble, which seems to be locking you out of the next room. This is your cue to head further down into Death Row, at the end of which you and your party will find an interactable shovel. Have a few players grab a shovel and run back up towards Glenna and the rubble. Simply use the shovel's only skill to dig away at the rubble blocking the pathway. After a few iterations, the rubble will clear and the Mursaat Overseer's room will be open. This is by no means difficult, rather it can just be a little confusing if you and your party are left directionless. Upon entering the room itself, you'll notice 3 illuminated pickups on one end of the arena. These are special buffs you'll be using throughout the fight, and for now it's only important that you know they exist. We will discuss them in far greater detail just a bit later on. Moving into the actual mechanics of the fight, it's important to mention a few of the boss's primary attacks, or rather a lack thereof. Interestingly, the Mursaat Overseer himself doesn't have even a single attack. He simply floats across the floor of the arena and lets you chip away at his health. There's a bit of pulsing arena damage, but it's a far cry from being called an important mechanic. Immediately after the boss is aggroed, he'll spawn a set of 4 Jade Scouts, or pawns if you prefer to think of the fight as a match of chess. For a while after they're spawned, the pawns will simply sit in place and watch the Mursaat Overseer take damage. It's only about 15 seconds after that they begin to move. They travel in a straight path towards the opposite edge of the arena, ignoring all players in their path. They have relatively low health, and can be momentarily stopped if you drain their HP to 0. This does mean, however, that the pawns themselves will never die, they simply stop moving for a short while. If, or rather when, a pawn reaches the opposite end of the game board, it's promoted to a Jade Soldier, or Knight if we keep up the chess motif. These knights are very different from their pawn counterparts. They're aggressive and out for blood. Immediately after transforming, a knight will make a direct beeline for the players. Their attacks do sizable damage and apply several conditions with each hit. Also, unlike their pawn counterparts, the knights will actually die when their HP is reduced to 0. Unfortunately, their death is not a quiet one, and each knight will explode when it is killed, dealing massive damage to anyone standing close to it. Hence, be sure if you kill a knight, you do it safely. As you've no doubt noticed by now, the boss's arena is covered in several glowing orange tiles. As intuition would suggest, these orange tiles are unsafe to stand on, in fact extremely so. Each second you're standing on one of these orange tiles, you'll receive a large packet of damage. Stand there for more than a few seconds, and you'll likely go down. The floor of the arena originally starts out half covered by these orange tiles. However, each time a pawn or a knight crosses onto an unlit tile, it will convert it to a hostile orange tile. There is no limit to how many orange tiles may exist on the board at one time, and it is certainly possible to have the entire arena swallowed by these orange panels. In addition to the orange panels on the ground, each individual tile has a series of holes carved into it. Periodically, a set of tiles will have their holes start glowing bright yellow. The animation is rather noticeable, even when overlaid onto an orange panel. Exactly 5 seconds after the holes start glowing, large spikes will thrust themselves out of each and every affected tile. These spikes will immediately defeat any player who fails to move out of their area. You will not go down, you will just die. As an aside, while the spikes may seem to spawn in a random pattern, they actually spawn in a very fixed manner. This image, made by a Reddit user, shows the exact locations of each spike spawn throughout the fight. You can find a direct link to this image in the description below. As I briefly mentioned earlier in the guide, the arena has 3 illuminated pickups, available from the moment the rubble is cleared and the room is entered. In order from left to right, the pickups are named Claim, Dispel, and Protect. One player will have to grab each pickup before the Mursaat Overseer is aggroed. As the last player grabs the last pickup, the fight will begin. The pickups bind themselves to a player's special action hotkey, and function similarly to an extra skill. Claim is on an 8-second cooldown, and its description reads, "Claim a tile for your team." The player that grabs Claim will effectively become the tank, as you will receive a fixated symbol above your head and draw the aggro from the Mursaat Overseer. In addition to drawing the boss's aggro, you're also responsible for using your special action hotkey to reclaim portions of the arena for your team. Claim functions as a ground-targeted AoE, and when it is dropped on a glowing orange square, it will revert the tile back to an unlit, safe area. Dispel is on an 18-second cooldown, and its description reads, "Dispel the protective shield surrounding an enemy game piece." As the description would imply, periodically throughout the fight, one random enemy game piece, be it a pawn or a knight, will get a bright orange shield. This protects the game piece indefinitely. If your team wishes to inflict any damage whatsoever on a shielded game piece, the player with Dispel must target the shielded game piece and use their special action hotkey. Unfortunately, this requires your player using Dispel to either tab target or physically click to the shielded game piece. After a successful Dispel, the enemy piece's shield will drop and your team will be able to damage it again. Protect is on a 180-second cooldown, and its description reads, "Create a protective dome that nullifies all incoming damage for a short time." The description of the skill essentially describes it entirely. It is a ground-targeted AoE that when used will spawn a small protective dome. Any player inside this dome will become completely invulnerable for about 5 seconds. Think of this ability as an incredibly long cooldown, steroided version of a Mesmer Distort. The first recommendation I'd like to make is pertaining to the team composition. Every time my group goes to clear the Mursaat Overseer, we end up using a slightly different composition. However, one thing remains consistent across every single run. We always run a full condition composition, and I'd recommend you do the same for a quick, easy kill. The exact composition can vary dramatically. However, for the strategy I'll be recommending, you'll need at least 2 Necromancers. In the past, my group has taken a composition with up to 5 Necromancers. You'll understand why this may be helpful just a little bit later. As for the rest of the team comp, consider bringing at least 1 Chronomancer, 1 Druid, and at least 1 Con DPS Warrior. The rest of your team slots can be filled with duplicates of these classes, a few Condi Rangers, a few Condi Engineers, or really any mixture of the 3. Essentially, build as much condition pressure into your team comp as possible. The strategy for this team composition is relatively straightforward. It revolves around clearing the initial spawn of pawns by letting them transform into knights. You'll DPS the Mursaat Overseer until the initial pawns reach your end of the game board, after which they will all simultaneously transform into knights and begin moving in on your party. Please note that just before the pawns transform, one of them will get an orange shield that must be dispelled. A mist or light dispel here is unrecoverable, and the entire party will likely wipe. Dispelling aside, the idea is to let all of the knights get in as close as possible, and have every single one of your Necromancers use the skill, Epidemic, at the same time. This will transfer an absurd amount of conditions onto the knights, killing them all very, very quickly. The knights should all die at nearly the exact same time, at which point they will all explode at nearly the exact same time. Ensure that everyone is stacked up on a tight point around the tank, and have your player with the Protect pickup use his special action hotkey to make everyone invulnerable for the knight's death explosions. And before I move on, just a quick note. The more Necromancers you bring here, the faster and cleaner this transition will be, though in the end, each additional Necromancer you add to the composition will result in a net DPS loss throughout the rest of the fight. Experiment with what works best for you and your group. After clearing the initial set of knights, you'll have a long period of time where your team will simply have to navigate around the arena and dodge the ground spikes. If you don't plan to learn the exact rotation for the spike spawns, it's not really a big deal. Simply mark the inner 4 squares with squad markers, and for 29 out of the 30 spike spawns, your team will always have a safe location to stand on with one of those 4 squares. Have your tank ensure that the inner 4 squares are claimed as soon and as often as possible. You'll want to milk as much DPS out of this portion of the fight as you can, as the pawns will eventually respawn, and if you aren't fast enough, you'll run the risk of spawning another set of knights. You can reduce the risk of this by either bouncing epidemics off the boss as the inner 2 pawns pass by, or by simply taking a moment to DPS all 4 of the pawns until they stop their movement. Remember, Epidemic is your best friend when killing the pawns, and use it whenever you get the opportunity to. The final recommendation I can offer pertains to each of the 3 unique buffs and the players that will be using them. All 3 of the pickups in this fight are absolutely crucial to the success of the pull. As such, you'll need the players running the pickups to perform near perfectly. A missed protect, a late dispel, or poor claiming will always lead to a wipe. Hence, it is best to prioritize use of the special skills even at the sake of your own personal rotation. Because of this, I'd recommend keeping heavy DPS classes or classes with a complex rotation off these special buffs. Outside of this piece of insight, there is no right or wrong answer for which class should take each buff. For reference, we have a Condi Mesmer run Dispel, a Condi Warrior run Protect, and a Chronomancer run Claim. This works for us, but you may find that other classes work better for you. All in all, the Mursaat Overseer is a rather simple, straightforward fight. He's a very fun boss to clear each week, and I hope this video will be of at least some marginal help to each of you looking to clear him in the future. As with any raid boss, frustration is your enemy. Stay calm, practice the fight, and you'll most certainly see results. Thanks for watching, and good luck.